expression. Let's say we have 4 times the quantity x minus y, whatever x and y are, and then plus 1. And then I'm going to give you, as a kind of like part of the problem, that x is equal to -2 and also that y is equal to +3. So all we have to do is substitute these values for the variables into our expression and then calculate. So we have 4 times x, but we say here that x is -2. And then we subtract off whatever y is, and y is +3. And then on the outside of the parentheses, we add 1. Now, to do this, we have to follow order of operations. We have parentheses, we must do what's in here first. So the 4 stays on the outside. What is -2 minus 3? When you start with something and then you subtract more away, when you start with something negative and you subtract more away, you go deeper negative, and so you're going to get -5 because you're going to go 3 units to the left and land at -5, and then finally you're going to have +1 here. Next, we have multiplication happening, but then we also have addition. Multiplication comes first. 4 times 5 is 20, but it becomes -20 because negative times positive is negative. Final step, we're adding these together, but we have opposite signs, negative and positive. So really what we do is subtract. 20 minus 1 is 19, and the sign goes with the larger absolute value, which is negative. And so the answer to this problem is -19. Now, when I'm working these, I'm kind of just cranking through it and talking through it, and when you're working them, I expect it to take longer. I expect you to have questions and maybe not be sure. That's okay. Part of becoming sure of yourself is just doing a lot of these things. All right, what about the expression 4a squared, 4 times a squared minus b? This is the expression, and I'm going to tell you that a is equal to 3 and b is equal to -4. So a is equal to 3. That means it goes right into this position. So what we have is 4. Now what I'm going to do to make it clear is I'm going to wrap this in here. The 3 squared is here. And then I'm going to have a minus b, but b is -4, so I'm going to wrap this in a parentheses as well. So you don't have to do this. You don't have to do it this way. I wrapped it in parentheses so you would know that it was 4 times the quantity a squared, a being 3. If you wanted to write it without the parentheses, it's fine to do that too. I can just take them away, and then you'd have to put a dot in the middle to show that you're multiplying here. So whatever you want to do, whatever you're more comfortable with, go ahead and do that. So in the next step, I have parentheses, and I have an exponent in the middle. So 3 squared is 3 times 3, which is 9. And then I have a minus minus, and when you have a minus minus, you change that to plus. So we have a +4 here. Now, I have multiplication happening and addition. I do multiplication first. 9 times 4, 36. And then finally, I have that 4 at the end, and that's going to be an answer of 40, +40. And that is the final answer. All right, let's increase the size of this thing just a little bit. Expression is x plus y, and the entire quantity is squared, and then I'm going to add 7 to the result. And I'm going to tell you that x is equal to 5 and y is equal to +1. And those need to go into those positions. So x is 5, so what we're going to have here is 5 plus y, which is 1, and then we have a square, and then I have a +7. Now, I have parentheses. I have to do what's inside of here first. 5 plus 1 is 6. I can now drop the parentheses, but don't forget I still am squaring whatever the result is, so it's 6 squared. And I add that 7. The next thing we do after parentheses is exponents. 6 squared is 6 times 6. 6 times 6 is 36. And then finally, the very last step, I add to this guy. 36 plus 7 is 43. +43, and that is the final answer. All right, making good progress. Let's tackle problem number 4. Let's say we have a larger expression, 5 times a minus 2 times b squared, and we're going to divide that by -1. Divide by -1. So I'm going to give you that a is equal to 2, and also that b is equal to +3. So we're going to stick those in the appropriate position. So here we have 5 times a, but a is 2. So just write 5 times 2. I could wrap it in parentheses if I wanted to. I'm going to write it like this. Minus 2 times, again, b is now squared, and b is 3, so it's 3 squared. And we're dividing by -1. Now what do you do next? I have this parentheses here. I have parentheses here too, but there's really only a number in there, so there's nothing to do. Inside of here, I have lots of things I can work on. Let's just do it one step at a time. We're going to do the exponent first. So I'll have 5 times 2 minus 2 times, and then 3 squared is 3 times 3, which is 9. And I'm dividing still by -1. Now, inside of this parentheses, I have multiplication happening, but also subtraction. The subtraction always comes last, and I'm allowed to work on these multiplications at the same time. 5 times 2 is 10, and then 2 times 9 is 18. And I'm still dividing by negative 11. All right, now in here, what do I have? 10 minus 18. So essentially, I'm doing a subtraction, but with the smaller number first. So when you hit that, just reverse it and subtract 18 minus 10, which is 8. And then because it's backwards, you stick a negative sign on the front. And the reason you're doing that is because you can also think of this as 10 plus a negative 18. And when you're adding two things with opposite signs, what do? You always just subtract them anyway, and the sign goes with the larger absolute value. So it's like 10 plus a negative 18. So I'll subtract them and get an 8, and this negative 18 here would be the larger absolute value. So I'm teaching you two ways to think about it. One way is to think of it as adding a negative number. Another way to think of it is just subtraction. And if you can't do the subtraction, then you just subtract it anyway and make it negative. Whatever way you want to think about it is fine with me. So I have negative 8, and I'm now dividing by negative 11. Negative 8 divided by negative 11. And this is an excellent example of how we can make mistakes. Notice I'm dividing by negative 1, dividing by negative 1, dividing by negative 1, dividing by what? Where did this come from? Came from nowhere. I was just asleep at the wheel. I put 11, I should have put a negative 1. Same thing carried down through here. I could easily stop this, edit that part out, but I want you to see that I make errors too, and sometimes your errors are not even math errors, it's just copy errors. But notice how we were able to immediately spot it. Because I have every step written down, I'm able to go up here and say, oh, well, it's right there. But if you skip too many steps, you can never find your errors. So what we're really doing is we're taking negative 8 divided by negative 1. So 8 divided by 1 is 8, and because it's negative divided by negative, remember the rule is you still get a positive. So the answer is positive 8, and that's the final answer. All right, really important to show your steps. You would never guess how many times I've done a page of work and then found an error at the top of the page, and then I was able to figure it out. 3 times x divided by parentheses 4 times y plus 10 quantity squared, and I'm going to tell you that x is equal to 8 and also that y is equal to negative 3. So we're going to take these variables and put them in their positions. 3 times x means 3 times 8. And I'm going to divide by, what do we have in here? 4 times y. Y is a negative number, so I'm going to wrap it in a parentheses just so I don't get confused what I'm doing. I'm multiplying times negative 3, and then I have that plus 10 quantity squared. Now, we always do what's inside of the parentheses first, so don't do anything on the outside. In the parentheses here, I have multiplication and addition. I multiply. 4 times 3 is 12, but it has to be negative 12 because 4 times negative 3. And I'm adding that 10, and then quantity squared. Next step, I have to continue working on what's inside the parentheses. I'm adding two numbers with opposite signs. So what do? Really, I subtract them. 12 minus 10 is 2. The sign goes with the larger absolute value. And so it actually becomes negative 2. Next step, I scan around. I've done all the parentheses. Now I have to do the exponent, which is the squaring operation. And what is negative 2 times negative 2? Remember, when you have something like negative 2 squared, what it really is negative 2 times negative 2. And negative times negative is positive 4. So this really just calculates to be a positive 4. So now you have multiplication and division, and they're at the same level, so you go left to right. First, do 3 times 8, which is 24. And then you'll do that dividing by 4 in the last step. 24 divided by 4 is 6, positive 6, and so the answer is positive 6. All right, next problem. Let's take a look at 5 times a, parentheses, 3 times a times b minus b. Now, when you have multiple letters written next to each other, there's no multiplication symbol, but this is 3 times a times b. It's implied multiplication. On the outside, you have 5 times a times this whole thing here. So there's no multiplication symbol in here, but there's tons of multiplication happening. But we always have to, first of all, in this case, I'll give you that a is equal to negative 1 and also that b is equal to 5. Now we have to take these values and put them in the right place. So 5 times a, but a is negative. You see, we want to put in parentheses because if we don't and we just put negative 1 there, it looks like subtraction. So we need to write it as 5 times negative 1. And then we'll do the same thing here. 3 times a is 3 times negative 1. And then times b, we can open up another parentheses. And this is very clear that they're all multiplied together. If you don't put parentheses, it'll look like subtraction. And then you have a minus b, but b is 5, and then we finally close that last parentheses off. So let's do what's inside of the parentheses. These we don't worry about till later because it's just numbers in there. So it's 5 times negative 1. And in here, we have multiplication and subtraction. So we're going to multiply these together left to right. 3 times negative 1 is going to be negative 3 because negative times positive times negative is negative. And in the next step, we can do the next multiplication. So here we have 5 times negative 1. Again, we have multiplication. 3 times 5 is 15, but it's negative 15 because the signs are different. And now in the next step, we have to rewrite everything in the front, and then we have a subtraction here. If it's a negative minus a negative, you go deeper negative, and you add these numbers, so it's a negative 20. We're deeper in debt. Negative 20 is the answer. And now we have 3 numbers to multiply together. Let's go in sequence. 5 times negative 1 is negative 5, and then multiply that by 20. Here we have 5 times 20 is 100, right? And then negative times negative is positive. So the answer actually turns out to be positive 100. It's very easy to make sign errors, extremely easy. Because every time you multiply these numbers, sometimes it can be negative and positive. And then when you add them, you can have a chance to mess the sign up. And then we do all these multiplications at the end, and all of these negatives end up going away, and the answer turns out to be positive. So the only defense you have against that is to write every step so that you're really not doing too many things at once. If you try to do too many things at once, you will probably make an error somewhere. You know, we all make errors, but you want to try to avoid them. Let's take a look at 4 times x times y minus 5 plus 3, and then we're going to have, on the outside of this, multiply that by 2. And so what do we have? We have x is equal to negative 2, y is equal to negative 4. All right, let's put them in their proper locations. What we have here is, we have a 4 times x, but x is negative 2, so we're going to put it in parentheses. The y is also negative, so we're going to put it in parentheses, so this is all multiplied together. Minus 5 comes along for the ride, plus 3, close the parentheses. Everything else we just copy. Now, we do what's in parentheses, but inside the outer parentheses, we have another set of parentheses. And inside here, we have multiplication happening and also subtraction. So what we have really here on the inside is, we'll go in order and multiply. 4 times 2 is 8, but it's negative 8 because it's positive times negative. So it's negative 8. We still have to multiply by negative 4 in the next step. And we just literally write everything down. Again, all we did was multiply this. Everything else remains the same. Now, we multiply these two. 8 times 4 is 32, but negative times negative is positive 32. We still have to subtract that 5. And then everything else we, again, copy. Now, what do we have inside of here? 32 minus 5. 32 minus 5 is, what, 27. So I have 27 in here. We can drop this parentheses because we've calculated 27. Still have to add that 3 and then multiply by 2. Over here, 27 plus 3, that's what we're doing next, is 30. And then we still have to multiply by 2. We can drop the parentheses after we calculate what's inside. What is 30 times 2? Positive times positive is a positive 60. That is the final answer. All right, now we're starting to get into some larger expressions here. This one's a little bit bigger than the rest. Let's take a look at this. What about 2 times a, open parentheses, 5 times a times b minus 6. We're going to close that off and square it. And then we're going to add 2 and then close that parentheses off. And I'm going to tell you that a is negative 1 and also that b is negative 2. So what are we going to do next? We have 2 times a, but a is negative 1, so I'm going to put that in parentheses so I don't make a mistake. Then I have 5 times a, which is also negative 1, times b, which is negative 2, so I'm going to write that in place. Then I have to write down my subtracting of a 6 and close it, and then I have to square it, and then I have to add 2 and close it all out. So this matches exactly above, but a goes to negative 1, a goes to negative 1, b goes to negative 2. Now, let's tackle it. All right. We have 2 times negative 1 on the outside. We'll do that later. But on the inside, we have this parentheses. Inside of that, we have this set of parentheses. And inside of here, we have multiplication happening. 5 times negative 1 times negative 2. So 5 times negative 1 is negative 5 because positive times negative. Still have to multiply by negative 2. And we just basically copy the rest of the problem down. We're just doing one little step at a time, right? Next step, what do we do next? We still have to work on the inside of here. And what do we have? Again, multiplication. 5 times 2 is 10, negative times negative is positive, so it's positive 10. That subtracting of a 6 is still there, like this. Again, we have to work on the inside of this parentheses we have here. And 10 minus 6 is just 4. We can drop the parentheses now, and it's 4 squared from here. All right? And then in the next step, again, we're working in this parentheses. 2 times negative 1. What do we have in here? We have addition, but we also have an exponent. Exponent comes first. 4 squared is 4 times 4, which is 16, like this. Let's continue over here. We have 2 times negative 1. And over here, we have 16 plus 2, which is 18. So what we have is 3 numbers multiplied together. Let's do them in order, left to right. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Now it's times 18. Now you can do it on a side sheet of paper, but if you may happen to remember, or you can use a calculator. 2 times 18 is 36, but this has to be negative 36 because negative times positive is a negative. And the answer we get is negative 36. All right, let's finish strong. We have 2 more problems. 8 times A divide by 3 times B minus 5 times C. And then we have over here plus 7. Now here we have an A, a B, and a C, right? So we're starting to get a little crazy now, right? A is equal to 8. I'm giving that to you. B, I'm telling you, is equal to 16. And C, I'm also telling you, is also equal to 8. So now we have to put them all in the proper locations and calculate. So 8 times A is going to be 8. So 8 times 8. Then divide by. 3 times B, B is 16. And minus 5 times C, C is also 8, right? Like this. And then we add 7. So that's what we have to do. Now, let's go ahead and just do everything by the book and do what's in the parentheses first. So we have 8 times 8 on the outside. Then we're dividing by, what do we have in here? 3 times 16. You may not remember that, so you can go over here. 16 times 3. 6 times 3 is 18. This is 3. This is 4. So 3 times 16 is 48. And we can do the other multiplication in parallel with it. 5 times 8 is 40. And we do that subtraction in the next step. Inside the parentheses, that's what we're going to work on next. What is 48 minus 40? You just get 8. And actually, we can just drop the parentheses. Once we calculate what's inside of there, we can just drop it. And then we have plus 7. Now what do we do? Because we have multiplication, we have division, and then we have addition at the end. So order of operation says that multiplication and division are at the same priority level, but they're both above addition or subtraction. So we have to do this multiplication and division before the addition there. And we go left to right. 8 times 8 is 64. Then we rewrite the problem. Divide by 8 plus 7. And 64 divided by 8 is 8, because 8 times 8 is 64. And then what is 8 plus 7? You get positive 15. Positive 15 is the right answer. So don't go forgetting your order of operations. You can't add first. You have to go left to right, multiplication, division, and then that addition there happens at the very end. All right, here's our very last problem. Let's make it a good one. Here we have 3 times x times y minus 2 times z squared plus 4 times y times z. So this is starting to look pretty ugly, right? I'm going to give to you that x is equal to 2 and y is equal to 1 and z is also equal to the number 4. So let's put everything in the right position. Here we have 3 times x, which is 2. Actually, I think I'll just use parentheses. Times 2 times y, which is 1, minus 2 times z squared. So z is 4. So let's put 4 here squared, like that. And then we have, or you could put you could put it on the inside actually if you want to. 4 times, let's do it this way. There's more than one way to write things. So we'll put 4 squared here. The 4 squared is multiplied by the 2. And then we have 4 times y, which is 1, times z, which is 4. So a little divider right there. Now, everything, this and this and this, they're all linked by pluses and minuses, and all of that goes at the end of the order of operations. Any exponents or multiplication or division always happens first. So we can work on things in parallel, and that's one thing I want you to get used to doing. So we have this set of multiplication. We can do that in parallel with the others, right? 3 times 2 is 6, but 6 times 1 is also 6. So we can just write that as 6. Now the 2, the multiplying by 2 has to happen later because we have this exponent. Exponents come first. 4 times 4 is 16. And we'll do this multiplication later. Now in this step, 4 times 1 is 4, and then 4 times 4 is again 16. So we did this to calculate 6, we did this to calculate 16, and here we only did the exponent first. Next step we must multiply. 2 times 16, that's 32. And now we have to go left to right. 6 minus 32. Again, you can't really do that subtraction, so in your mind, flip it around. What is 32 minus 6? You can write that as 26. And you can put a negative on the front because you're doing the subtraction backwards. You can also think of it as 6 plus a negative 32. And so the sign goes with the larger absolute value and you subtract them anyway. Same way of thinking about it. And then you have plus 16 here. So now you have a negative number plus a positive number. So I always teach you when you do that to do the subtraction as usual. 26 minus 16. That will come down to 20 and then come down to 10. So 26 minus 16 is 10, and the sign of the answer is the bigger absolute value, which is this one. So the answer actually is negative 10. So that was a long list of problems. We started with easier problems, problems that are fairly simple to plug in and calculate, and then we cranked up the complexity so that at the end we have these very lengthy things. But all of them boil down to really understanding the order of operations. And there's also a little bit of technique to know how to write it. When you have negative numbers, I'm often putting them in parentheses, you know? But there's no rule of algebra that says I have to do that. It's just that if I write it in parentheses, this negative number, it looks cleaner because I know that I'm multiplying times a negative. If you forget to write parentheses and start using the multiplication dot, or even worse, an x, then you're going to start getting confused because we have x's everywhere. So never ever write x for multiplication. If you put a dot right there, then 4 times a negative 3, you can often not see the dot and it looks like subtraction. So you also are kind of learning through watching that you wrap your negatives in parentheses a lot. And there's just little things like that. You don't see them as rules of algebra, but you see them in practice. And I'm also trying to teach you to write every single step down. I even made a mistake in this lesson and caught it because I wrote my steps. Everyone makes mistakes, even me. So I want you to write your problems down, write your steps down to try to catch as many mistakes as you can. That's part of the game. You have to do that. So solve all of these yourself. And then follow me on to the next lesson. We're going to start to learn how to add and subtract expressions in algebra. Learn anything at mathandscience.com.